Yeah.
And then I just do that. There we go. Okay, I'll start over. Welcome to our May Spotlight on Research webinar. I'd like to open this event with an acknowledgement that Mental Health Research Canada is the host of this webinar, is located on the traditional territory of the Mississauga of the Credit, the Wendat, and several other First Nations. Today, this land is home to many Indigenous peoples, and we are deeply grateful to live here with them. Our Spotlight on Research series is intended to highlight the various impactful research projects that have been funded by us and by our partner organizations across the country. Here at MHRC, we're all about our partnerships, and we're thrilled to open this session by highlighting our fantastic partnership with the New Brunswick Health Research Foundation. We've been partnering with them for several years now on several initiatives, and today you'll hear about just one of the impactful projects that have been made possible by this collaboration. And so with that, I am delighted to have Leah Carr, Nbhrf's Director of Programs and Human Development, here with us today. And I'll turn it over to her to say a few words and to introduce our speakers.
Thank you, Sarah. And hello, everyone, and welcome to the webinar. Just kind of a little overview of Nbhrf. You always have to promote yourself whenever you have the opportunity. We are the Provincial Health Research Funding Organization in New Brunswick. We have a mandate to coordinate, promote, and support health research in the province. We have been in existence since July 2008. For the majority of that time, we've been very focused on capacity building in health research in New Brunswick. I think we've been around long enough now for me to actually say something new, which is we haven't really done too bad a job of that. Capacity certainly has increased since we've been able to help support the enterprise. So I'm very happy about that. And I'm happy to be here also with Erin and Nathan. I'll introduce them for you now. Erin is an associate professor of sociology at St. Thomas University in Fredericton. She works with research teams to examine the well-being and healthcare needs of queer, trans, and non-binary people. Joining Erin today is Nathan Thompson, and Nathan is a therapist and university instructor in Fredericton, and he has over 13 years of training and experience in working with the LGBTQ+ people. He specializes in working with members of the LGBTQ community in his private practice located in downtown Fredericton, and he is also a professional member of the Canadian Professional Association for Transgender Health. Welcome to both of you, and I will let you take it away.
Great. Thank you so much, Leah. We are joining you from the banks of the Wolastoq River on Wolastoqey land in New Brunswick. We encourage everyone to visit Land Back You for a free program to learn more about what it means to do these acknowledgements before we start our presentations. We are talking to you today about a research study that is mostly finished, although we keep picking away at the knowledge sharing. And we'll be talking to you about our intergenerational program that we developed to support queer, trans, and non-binary youth through COVID-19. We want to start by acknowledging the work of our team. And so this is our many logos slide. We are working with Ardath Wynot, who's a fabulous sociology professor from Mount Allison University. Kelly Baker and Erin Beaumont were our project staff, both of whom did amazing work, essentially running this project for the team. Rick Sharp is our elder researcher and provided input on that piece of the work. And then we have representatives from a number of nonprofit organizations in New Brunswick, including the CMHA, Partners for Youth, and AIDS New Brunswick. So thank you to everyone so much for their work on this project. Nathan.
So yeah, just starting a bit with the inspiration behind the project itself. At the beginning of the pandemic, there were concerns right away of how it was impacting LGBTQ youth specifically. Early on in the pandemic, the Canadian Mental Health Association, this was in 2020, found, quite early, I guess, that during the pandemic so far, LGBTQ plus people were reporting worse mental health than their heterosexual and cisgender peers. And were also three times more likely to attempt self-harm. So that LGBTQ youth plus youth were worse off than their heterosexual and cisgender peers was also confirmed later on, just to kind of tie this in with the MHRC's polling data that they did themselves. This is back in April and June of 2021. So that confirmed that same stuff, that they were struggling more than heterosexual and cisgender folks. But in addition, that polling data suggested that LGBTQ plus Canadians were also less confident in their ability to cope with mental health challenges. So the inspiration, first of all, was, our concern. How are they doing, and what might we be able to do to help a bit? So Dr. Gary Kinsman, who's a sociologist and well-known LGBT studies researcher here in Canada, argued that community responses that occurred during the AIDS epidemic offered important lessons for the COVID-19 pandemic, which made sense. We felt that this would be a good time to put that argument into practice. What could be gleaned from those who experienced a previous crisis? How might that help those struggling in the community now? What would it look like to put those lessons into practice? Personally, as a community practitioner, I wanted to be involved in the project as I was personally noticing that the pandemic was having a negative impact on the youth clients that I was seeing in my practice, but was also feeling rather powerless to do much about it. I noticed for some reason my printers decided to start printing stuff in the background. Hopefully that's not making too much noise. I noticed an increase in anxiety, depression, overall senses of hopelessness, loneliness in most of the youth I was seeing. Though also some reported improved mental health, which was also confirmed by CMHA, their data, that one positive outcome of the pandemic was more alone time for people to actually reflect a bit. And the youth, and also what I found was also particularly trans youth that were in the midst of thinking about transitioning. They liked the fact that they didn't have to go to school every day and see teachers and people that maybe they didn't feel comfortable transitioning around. So the youth I saw who were feeling worse reported they were feeling stuck at home in unsafe conditions, unable to cope. The youth I saw who reported feeling better, again, notice it was because they just felt better at home. School was actually a more problematic space for them. Another thing was that a lot of local resources for LGBTQ plus youth and their families were shut down initially. So many youths who were sort of new, younger youths who were new to kind of their sexual or gender identities, or at least were just starting to come out about them, were very unaware of anything that was in the community that they could go to, and everything had been canceled. So there was no way to really find out about them. So while a minority reported improved mental health, the majority experienced a lack of connection to others like them and increased emotional difficulty, particularly for students in more rural areas, as well as they often felt unsafe at home and also trapped in their communities. So it was sort of like a double-edged sword. Yeah, Erin.
Thanks, Nathan. So taking all that into account, we decided to try to put Gary Kinsman's ideas into practice. So what would it look like for youth to actually learn from local elders who lived through the AIDS epidemic? And so the way that we did that methodologically involved 4 stages. So in the stage 1, we conducted video recorded interviews with elders who lived through the AIDS epidemic, who now live here in New Brunswick. Most of them went through the epidemic itself in larger city centers and have since migrated here. And in those interviews, we asked the elders to describe what it was like to be part of the queer community during that time and what lessons they learned going through that. And we'll talk later about where folks can access those videos if you're interested in watching them. The feedback from the elders was actually that doing the interviews was super rewarding for them. Because many of them, the living through COVID-19 had actually been quite upsetting for them because it was reminding them of their time living through the AIDS epidemic. And so they were happy to have a chance to talk about it. And of course, I think we need to acknowledge right now with the increased news around monkeypox, that our community is again threatened by the stigma of an epidemic that people are associating with us as people instead of with a particular form of transmission, or just the fact that when people are together in a space, an illness spreads in different ways. So stage 2, we recruited a group of older youth in their early 20s, late teens, who went through a series of workshops with us to describe what it's like to be a youth member of the community, then to watch the elder videos, draw lessons from that, and then develop some themes that they thought would be helpful for a program for younger youth. That became our pilot program, which Nathan will walk you through in a minute. And we offered that program in 2 schools here in Fredericton. We actually were able to go into the schools in person in partnership with Partners for Youth and run that 4-week, now 5-week program with 2 groups of younger youth. So the program now is in its stage of being finalized, and then will be available to anyone across Canada to run with all of the documentation associated with it. So some of the lessons that we took, other than the development of the program itself, which was the key goal of the study, was that the queer, trans, and non-binary youth we talked to are connected to their community in quite a different way from the elders. What the older youth noticed was that the elders supported each other in person because of the time, and really felt a sense of support in their community. Queer, trans, and non-binary youth now are more informed about queer issues, for example, because they learn a lot on social media and connect with people there. But it also created this sense of there being maybe an ideal way of being queer, trans, or non-binary that was inaccessible to them, much like all of the ideals that we see promoted on the internet. And so folks felt kind of excluded from the community because they were engaging with it through this mediated form. They also have learned a lot about oppression. You know, teaching sociology in university is very different now because the students come in with that language of intersectionality and what oppression is. But this focus on how they're oppressed or what the problems with the community are overshadowed or maybe totally made invisible the resilience of our communities and the strengths and our histories and all of those things were sort of missing from their understanding. And so, of course, we're going to conclude this because this was our premise. We agree with Gary Kinsman that queer, trans, and non-binary youth need intergenerational support and preferably not social media based support, although it could be online, to build a sense of real belonging and connection with their communities, and in particular, learning about their histories of resilience and resources and seeing their communities as a source of support.
So I'm just going to walk you through a little bit what the pilot program entailed. And originally, when it was run, it was actually a 4-week program, but it's since been split into the 5 weeks that you see here, based on feedback that was received from the participants and Kelly and Erin who did it, that it was just felt rushed. There wasn't enough time to cover it all weeks. I think it was weeks 3 and 4 that were together as one. So yeah, I'll just go over briefly a little bit, particularly just the core activity and how it connects to what we learned from the older youth and the older adults, like how we were trying to put it into practice in the workshop. So for instance, week 1 was the Pieces of Me puzzle. Here students were given puzzle pieces and asked to write on each piece one of their identities. After that, they were engaged with a spoken word piece about identity by Ivan Coyote, who's a well-known non-binary Canadian writer and advocate. And they were asked to then reflect on their own puzzle pieces. So this was the result of both the older adult participants and the older youth participants speaking about the many pieces of their identities and when they mattered the most, which it also ended up to being a kind of good get to know yourself and other activity as well, because it's week 1. Feedback from the facilitators was that this was the most challenging also activity, as students had a hard time thinking about identities beyond certain categories. I don't know if Erin, did you want to just say something about that?
Yeah, I think that we were trying to, inspired by the elder and older youth, we were trying to get the youth to think about who they are as a person within the community, you know? So we were giving examples, even things like, you know, I love being outside, or, you know, I'm a dog parent, but I'm also queer and a cis woman. And the students gravitated towards these large social group identities. So their puzzle pieces were, you know, it's New Brunswick, I'm white, I'm, you know, bi, I'm this, I'm that. And we were trying to get them to think through more, you know, things they care about, what makes them unique, that kind of thing. And we had trouble getting them to speak beyond the sort of labels themselves. And also a lot of them are in a sort of state of trying to pick from, you know, far more numerous labels for their identities than Nathan and I think, had access to when we were first identifying as queer. And so many of them struggled with that itself, sort of how to place themselves within the community, whether or not they had the right to do that. And so that was quite a complicated discussion to lead them through.
Yeah, so something thinking about for implementing it, you know, how can we help transition that better? Or maybe we even need to do more to educate around, you know, what is an identity as opposed to just taking it for granted. So we don't want to cause more anxiety, you know, getting them to think about identities when they're already feeling anxious and insecure. So the second week, then we move into kind of designing this ideal safe space. So here students were asked to draw using supplies they were given, like art supplies, what their dream safe space would look like just for themselves. And then they were asked to reflect on what it was they created. In particular, they were asked to think about how some of the features of these spaces that they made could be made a reality and brought into their lives, as opposed to it just remaining sort of a dream space. This was the result of the older youth participants speaking about the value of alone time and self-reflection, the importance of sort of, you know, boundaries and knowing when they need to take some time for themselves. The week 3 and 4, week 3 and 4, which was week 3 for us, there was a pod mapping activity. So students were given a pod map worksheet so they could map out the people and resources in their lives that are supportive to them. The idea here was to invite the students to see the supportive networks in their lives. Following this, what has now again become week 4, the students did a found poetry activity to help connect the pod mapping activity to a greater sense of community support. So the students were here in this portion were given inspiring quotes on pieces of paper that came from the older youth and older adult participants, such as, quote, you know, the queer community cares for each other. And then the youth were asked to create a poem about the community based on those quotes. So this was the result of the older adult participants speaking about the importance of close friends and the larger queer community during the difficult times that they had endured. Lastly, we have the design a superhero activity. So students here were asked to create themselves as a superhero, focusing on their unique gifts, traits, and strengths. This was the result of the older adult participants describing how each member of the queer community brought their gifts to help others during the AIDS crisis. So here are sort of like, you know, what can these young people bring to their community? What are their resources they can bring during our current crisis? Also during this week, I'll note that food was provided, and of course the students really liked that. So there's some feedback. Food is always appreciated. So overall, the feedback from the students around the pilot program was that they thought it was great, they thought it was fantastic, and they really appreciated the intergenerational nature of the pilot. So having older queer adults there running it. Erin, I don't know if you don't have to, did you want to say something about that, your role there?
Sure. So the folks who attended the pilot were myself, Kelly Baker, and Brittany Flornovic from Partners for Youth. And we ran all of the sessions. And I think it was interesting. The students did want to know right away if we were part of the queer community, and all of us are, you know, quite involved as advocates. So that was easy. Most of them actually already known from Googling us, I think. But we, for them, it really mattered. Most of them don't know that many queer adults. And so for them, they had a lot of questions about our lives and what it was like. We did all the activities with them as well. And so they got to see us complete the activities, and we could discuss our perspectives as well. And so I think it really mattered that the whole program itself, you know, the research design was intergenerational, but offering the mental health program was intergenerational as well. When we launched the program online to make it available to GSAs, for example, across the country, it will have a feedback form function. And we're hoping to hear some evaluations from folks that run the program, particularly when it's a straight cisgender person offering this program, and seeing maybe what challenges they have, or how it sort of goes in a different way, because we didn't have an opportunity to see what that would be like. And certainly I think some of the questions, they weren't asking overly personal questions, but certainly some of the nuances in even the identity categories might be challenging to answer if you aren't either part of the community, or like Nathan and I always say, we didn't get some sort of course because we are members of the community. This is what we study. And so it's our area of expertise. And so that could be maybe more challenging for a teacher, for example, who doesn't have that information. Was there anything you wanted to add, Nathan?
No, that's it.
That's it? Okay. So we had some really talented folks working on the project, and we wanted to highlight 2 of their pieces of work that are also going to be publicly available. On the left of your screen, you have the front page of a zine created by Erin Beaumont, who was our youth researcher and is also an artist. You can follow them on Instagram under Steel Transplants, STEEL. They do great work, and just had an article published in Salty Magazine, actually. So I'll do a pitch for them as well while I'm here. So for those who don't know, a zine is a homemade magazine, sort of like a pamphlet, and they're quite popular in marginalized communities for sharing information sort of on the ground, that's grassroots sort of knowledge, that might not necessarily be published by a large publishing agency or make it out into the world another way. So what Erin did was took the lessons from the elder videos, the interviews that we had, and Erin did sit in on those, so they got to listen to the stories, and they created a workbook on survival tips from queer elders. And so in the zine, there's a lot of images, and there's actually little worksheet pages that people can complete themselves to reflect on some of the lessons from the elders. So for example, one of the most moving moments in one of the interviews was one of our participants was diagnosed with HIV during the epidemic. And he talked about the first year that he realized he would survive, and that he planted tulip bulbs for the first time. And so this one little piece of hope for the future. And so one of the pages asks queer, trans, and non-binary youth to think through what would be your tulip bulb. What's something that you can sort of look forward to 1 year from now, or 6 months from now, or 2 weeks from now, if that's where you are at this point in time. And so that zine was made available to print from our Instagram and on our website. And then we also sent out paper copies. We sent out, I think, 100 paper copies in the last 2 weeks to anybody who requested them. On the right, you have a screenshot from one of our interviews. This was our participant, Brad. I'll note that the elders gave permission for their names and faces to be shared publicly, of course, or we wouldn't be doing so. And those videos have been edited down from our interviews into around 10 minutes each. And they've been made available publicly as well. And I'll send the link to Sarah to get that to all of you folks. And those videos have actually already been used in our aging and health course here at STU, and have become sort of part of the teachings from the study itself.
So next steps. Obviously, this program needs to be run in every school across the country. That's what we want to have happen. So we want this being implemented everywhere. That would be wonderful. Locally, of course, we already did the pilot. They're the Partners for Youth who helped run it this time, want to run it next year. So that's already something that's in the works to have happen. So yeah, so that would be like the big next step, is having this just be implemented across the board. I also, as a clinician, I think that I also took from this that I think would be important for other clinicians as well. So it's not just about sort of the program, but what it teaches us in general. And the first one for me was certainly that there is a huge need for more community-based practices around mental health. So much of what's done right now, mental health wise, is two people in a room. It's myself, a therapist sitting across from a youth, which is great. I mean, that's good. Obviously, I wouldn't do it if I didn't believe in it, and it's not, something I love and think is important. But what I really took from all of this is just the importance of connection and needing greater community connections, particularly for the LGBTQ community. So really, just for me, it's thinking about how might mental health practitioners, social workers, therapists, counselors, psychologists, how might we be able to create new models of implementing mental health care to better meet these kinds of needs, other than just sort of typical group therapy? What is a new kind of way of doing this? It goes beyond that kind of clinical therapeutic model that's more about community connection. The other one that I took away certainly was the need for online accessibility. I think that taught us, a lot of us, that. I know a lot of people were just so sick and tired of online stuff that they were excited to get away from Zoom. But for a lot of the young people, Zoom was a lifesaver. Being able to do counseling with folks over Zoom meant that they could connect with me from their rural community, and even just doing so on their phone outside their home, something they couldn't have done. They couldn't have gotten their parents to drive them here before. So these are young people hoping to access transitioning services for gender, medical services that they would not have been able to before. So I think also looking at like the importance of doing things online, which is of course how a lot of this project was done as well, is by using online. And lastly, I think the importance was around connection to community history and older generation LGBTQ plus adults, in order to build a more of a collective narrative of resiliency, which I think obviously speaks to my first point as well around greater connection, but also avoiding the pitfalls of just push through it. You just got to hunker down and get on with it. Resiliency is not about just pushing through hard things. It's about being able to be flexible and allow difficult feelings and thoughts and experiences to take place without needing to push them aside. So I think there's a lot of potential connections and bridges here between experiential knowledge and learning and the field of mental health and approaches like, for instance, mindfulness or acceptance commitment therapy. There's a lot of potential, I think, interwovenness that could happen here that I took away from this. Erin, did you want to say anything about future studies or in directions in that way?
Yeah, sure. So most of the folks on this team are also part of a SSHRC funded study that we started before the pandemic and then had to delay for what seems like an endless amount of time, but also 2 weeks. And so that study is actually looking at queer, trans, and non-binary youth perceptions of what a livable future would look like. And it's an art-based study where they'll be producing art items that we are going to show in a gallery show here in New Brunswick and in Nova Scotia. And so those art workshops are starting in the next couple months. We're really excited about that. One of the other things that came up when we were working with the older youth was a need to connect around things like food. So, we joke about queer potlucks, but in fact, there are a number of folks who struggle with food in our community and also with being outdoors, feeling safe doing that. And so we're hoping that a future study will be group-based again, but have different activities like a cooking class, like going for a walk in nature, that sort of thing, to kind of allow people to build some different skills through the program as well. And so that's what we're planning, as much as we are capable right now of planning years in advance. Thank you so much. I've put my email on the final slide, and I see there's already a couple of folks who've posted in the Q&A, which we will get to, but you're also welcome to reach out privately to me if you have any questions or you'd like access to any of the resources we've talked about today. So thank you so much for attending a Zoom webinar after 2 years of Zoom webinars. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for that, Erin. That was fantastic. I I'm actually really excited to see some of those videos from the older participants and things. So yeah, there's some great things in that. I guess we'll go straight to, I know we have some questions from the audience. Oh, also just for everybody, so everyone knows, not only did she put her email up there, but I will be sending out an email to all participants and registrants with the resources Erin mentioned, as well as, and you can respond to that email and I'd be happy to connect you with either Nathan or Erin if you have further follow-up questions for that. But so one of the questions in the Q&A is about peer support. So while it's clear that the individuals participating in the project identified with the community, she's wondering about how peer support delivery could be integrated into the research. Do you see that that could play a role in future iterations of the program?
We've talked about having sort of a, for lack of a better program name, Big Brothers, Big Sisters sort of situation where we match queer youth with older adults in the community. Certainly some of the older youth who took part felt really connected in the videos, watching the videos with the older adults, and the older adults did consent to have their email shared with the older youth. And so they've connected by email to ask follow-up questions about the videos. Certainly we could run a formal program. The liability issues around some of that are a bit intimidating for us as researchers, because it's something that's sort of, it's a lot larger in terms of our responsibility. And we are also quite careful, or at least I should speak just for myself. I'm quite careful. I don't want to, those nonprofits that drop into cities and they run a program for 2 hours and then they leave and take everything with them. I am paid to sort of create something, research if it works. And then our ethical position is that it then should be shared for free because we've taken public money to create this program. But what we share for free is sort of then out in the world, and we're no longer connected with it in the same way. And so to run a peer support program, we would need commitment for that to run for a long period of time and continue to be available to folks beyond the end of the research. And so I'm not sure that we have the capacity to do that, but I know that there are other folks in New Brunswick who are talking about it. Nathan, did you want to address anything else?
The only thing that came to mind was even just not even myself fully understanding what this person meant by peer support service. Like, do they mean like youth with youth? Or was it more the older adults connecting with youth? Because I think that would really also matter too. Like if it was some sort of youth with youth, we know not a lot of universities are doing this, including right here at University of New Brunswick, where they're implementing mental health peer support networks. So I think I would just need more clarification, maybe.
Yeah, we do that at the universities. There are some youth groups in New Brunswick that already meet and run those programs themselves. And there are national phone lines if it's that kind of support. But yes, that's true. I made a guess about what was meant, but if you'd like to follow up, we'd be happy to answer more in the Q&A.
We've also got another question here from Mario. And Mario, let me know if I'm misinterpreting this in any way, or if I don't explain it the way you mean it to be explained. So he's asking, has there been any sponsorship for work terms with any industries that would support and include students in community work opportunities? And so I'm not sure if that means like integrating, the students into like community service as part of a piece of the program. Is that what you mean by that? Oh, I see Mario's raised his hand. Here, I can take him off mute so he can speak directly. Hi, Mario.
Hey, hi, good afternoon. Interesting discussion. I guess the question, as poorly worded as it was meant to say, so what hope for opportunities are available or are being sought for people to put them into and connect them to society and build their confidence in terms of contributing and being included and being part of teams and that kind of stuff. And maybe even the clarification isn't very clear, but that's what I meant. Is there any look at including them and finding opportunities for including them in the community for a contributing type of environment and being recognized for that?
I know two of our colleagues, Angela Black and Eamon Paul, are working with the New Brunswick government right now to create more work opportunities for queer, trans, and non-binary youth in the provincial government. So that's a separate project from us, but they are working really hard. This is just one community of many that they're helping design programs for. You know, we talk about the universities a lot. Certainly the universities in New Brunswick have a far higher percentage of queer, trans, and non-binary students than most universities in Canada, interestingly. And so we're doing our part that way to train folks and create spaces where they can access education in a way that feels safe. The schools themselves here mostly have gay, straight alliances, poorly named GSAs at this point, that are supporting youth in doing, you know, volunteer work in their community and running advocacy programs within their schools. But we didn't focus in this program on actual life or work skills. Our focus was sort of helping people feel connected to the queer community itself and seeing that as a resource. One of the things that inspired the work was that what we were seeing a lot was that folks had this perception because they've seen so many statistics in the world about how difficult it is to be queer, trans, and non-binary and what their risks are and how vulnerable they are. They had this sense that it was sort of this ominous thing, you know, this is like this, I'm oppressed, I'm marginalized, I'm vulnerable. And while those things are true, statistically, we also know that, you know, tons of queer folks are very happy that they're queer and find their community here and feel supported and belonging and have access to resources that maybe some cis straight people don't have access to, that same sense of found community. And so this program was very narrowly focused on that issue in particular.
Awesome. I would like to chime in with a question of my own, just for, I know you guys mentioned, or Nathan mentioned, that the dream is to kind of have this implemented in schools across the country. I was wondering if you have any plan, like how would you go about implementing that? Is maybe a next step to like partner with a school board to do like a pilot program across things like that? Or is that something that's a few steps away?
Right now we're connected to the network of GSAs in New Brunswick and Nova Scotia in particular. And we've actually had some folks reach out from across the country after there was some coverage on the news. And so It Gets Better Canada wants to help with the rollout of the program across the country. And they're connected to the GSA networks in, you know, every province. And so we're packaging this up with Kelly Baker's fabulous graphic design skills into a beautiful PDF, sort of downloadable program. So each week comes with lesson plans, all the handouts, the justification for that week. Why are you doing it? How should you introduce it? What questions might come up? All of that's in there. And so that program will go out through the GSA networks, and hopefully that will support the first round of rollout. And of course, you know, we're always willing. I do tons of guest visits to a lot of schools. And so we're always happy to drop in to help folks implement it as well. And Partners for Youth here as a nonprofit will be offering it, and they've offered to share the program with their partners in other provinces as well. So hopefully it's quite promising, I think.
I'm hoping also as well, like in terms of practitioner side of things, I think it would be, once we get some more, you know, like academic publishing out there, even for myself, thinking about how I might be able to write in a way that's catered towards what we can take away from this project for practitioners in Canada. So then like, you know, say members of the Canadian Counselling and Psychotherapy Association, the CCPA, could have access. That way I could, it could be like a blog post or some sort of article that's more accessible, just to also think about what can we also take from this for not just schools, but also clinicians, people out there that are working with youth in different ways.
Yeah, that's the great part of having these interdisciplinary teams. Both MHRC and Nbhrf are super supportive of research that's a little bit less maybe quantitative and academic than a lot of other funding agencies are willing to support. And so because of that, we have folks on the team who want to share the data in a lot of different ways. And so we'll have our classic, journal articles that we publish as academics, but we'll also have some in-practice pieces, and then the zine and videos and more creative sharing as well. So that will all, this was 12 months of funding, which was reasonably optimistic, but all of that will happen over the next 6 months or so.
That's really fantastic. I'm just seeing on the clock, we only have a few minutes left. So if anyone else has any final questions, please put them into the chat. And otherwise, I'd like to pass it to Leah. I don't know if you have any questions or comments that you'd like to make.
A couple of comments. I didn't know whether I was going to get an opportunity to make comments, but here we go. You can absolutely tell, at least I could tell for sure, that both Sarah and I are from funding agencies, because my question would have been the exact same one that she asked you. The other comment I have is along the lines of what Erin just spoke about, the interdisciplinary nature of the team. I think one of the major things for your team is what Nathan has talked about a couple of times in terms of the clinical practice side of things. That is often an aspect that is lacking in research, particularly obviously health research, and it's really one of the most important things for health research. So I would, Erin, if I were you, I'd be really putting the pressure on him to get it out there to the clinical community.
Oh, I don't have to pressure Nathan. Nathan is both an academic and a clinician, so he pressures himself. We're
That's
good.
yeah, I've got a lot of internal pressure.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I wouldn't want to overwhelm him, but no, you're right. We're so grateful because, the type of work that everyone on this team does is work that we think can make actual change, but we're not necessarily the right people to carry that message forward. And so we're so grateful for folks who volunteer their time to take part in these projects and then can help us really implement some of this work so it actually makes a difference.
Yep. It's impact is what it's all about, for sure. Anyway, thank you to both of you for doing this for us today. I think a lot of us learned quite a bit.
Thanks so much, Leah.
Thank you.
And Sarah.
Yeah, just to echo that, this was really fantastic. So thank you guys for taking the time out of your day to share this all with us. I don't see any more questions in the chat, so I don't know if anyone else has any final comments, but otherwise we'll wrap it up, and I'll be sending out both a link to this recording as well as the resources from Erin. As I said, not only to all of you here that have registered, but that attended, but also all the registrants. So yeah, you'll get that out. You'll get that email probably tomorrow.
Thank you so much for organizing all of this, Sarah. We really appreciate your technological support and your thoughtful questions.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah.
Don't worry. Have a great rest of your day, everyone.
Thank you. You too.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.